Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to The World Lit by Lightning and for attending the 2021 Tennessee Williams New Orleans Literary Festival, beaming straight to your homes from New Orleans for the first time this year. Ordinarily, you would be seeing Robert Bray first, who is the founding editor of the Tennessee Williams Annual Review, and you will see him later. This time you are seeing the managing editor of the review, Margaret Longbreak. I am also senior editor at the Historic New Orleans Collection. We publish the Tennessee Williams Annual Review. And as we start the session, I'm going to give a little plug for the review and tell you how this particular session came to be. When we knew that the Scholars Conference wasn't going to happen in the way it usually does with everyone in the same room, we thought we would have at least one scholarly place for attendees to go. And we wanted it to be something sort of lively and something visual, since people are sitting at home watching screens. And the first thing we thought of is, well, let's put up the cover of this year's annual review, which is a picture of a production of Streetcar Named Desire that was in Vienna. And Annette Sadek has a review of this production in the journal. That's Stella there in the green hair, and the man with the flowered suit with his back to us is Stanley. It was a wild production. They flooded the stage. Actors were walking around in a foot of water. There was a waterfall at intermission. I think at the end, Stanley gave Blanche a lobotomy with an ice pick through the eye. And everything about it and about this picture was so 2020. I couldn't stand it, and we had to put it immediately on the cover of the journal. And it's been so much fun to think about it and talk about it that we thought, well, let's invite some scholars to come and pick an image related to Tennessee Williams that is their favorite. And so they can show us a little love, which we can all use, I think, after the year that we've been through. And so now I will turn in a moment, I will turn the floor over to Robert Bray, the founding editor. How the session will work, it's a lightning round, is that our speakers will each speak for about 10 minutes. And if you want to type your questions into chat while they talk, Robert will have some remarks after they finish speaking, and then we'll have a question and answer period at the end. So without further ado, the founding editor of the Tennessee Williams Annual Review, as well as the founder of the Tennessee Williams Scholars Conference, Robert Bray.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you for all you do, and thanks to the collection. The Scholars Conference could not take place literally without your support. So it's been really fortunate for us to be involved with you all these years. Also want to thank Tracy and Sergio for their help putting this together, but Margaret really deserves all the credit for this session today. And I also want to thank the presenters, of course, and the audience for tuning in. We can't replicate the total Scholars Conference experience here, but we're going to try to provide an electronic approximation of the event. So thanks for joining us today. I want to remind everyone that today is Tennessee Williams' birthday. He died, of course, in 1983, but he would have been 110 years old today, and probably rewriting a play, working on a new one, and having 1 or 3 martinis to celebrate his birthday. So Tennessee, happy birthday to you. At this point, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Tiffany Gilbert is department chair and associate professor in the English department at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She's published articles on Otto Preminger's Carmen Jones, Douglas Sirk's Imitation of Life, Giuseppe Verdi's Otello, Fred Schapisi's Film Plenty, I hope I pronounced that right, and Jim Sheridan's My Left Foot. She is currently working on her book, Anna Magnani, forthcoming from Edinburgh University Press. Bess Rowen is visiting assistant professor of theater at Villanova University. Her book, The Lines Between the Lines, How Stage Directions Affect Embodiment, is forthcoming from Michigan University Press. She's co-editor of the anthology Theater Scandals, Social Dynamics of Turbulent Events. And her recent articles can be found in Modern Drama, Journal of Dramatic Theory and Criticism, Eugene O'Neill Review, and Theater Journal. She also serves as the performance review editor for the Eugene O'Neill Review and the conference planner for the American Theater and Drama Society. Naghmeh Rezaie is a poet, translator, and PhD candidate in English at the University of Delaware, where she works with adaptation theory, cross-cultural adaptations, and national and international cinema studies. Her master's thesis at the University of Tehran examined Tennessee Williams' cinematic adaptations, and her dissertation project focuses on cross-cultural adaptations in Iranian cinema. Her essay, Here Without Me, the cross-cultural adaptation of the Glass Menagerie in Iranian cinema, appears in the 2018 issue of the Tennessee Williams Annual Review. My good friend Barton Palmer is Calhoun Lemon Professor Emeritus at Clemson University, where he was the founding director of the World Cinema Program. He's the author of editor of more than 60 books, as well as more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. With Robert Bray, he wrote Hollywood's Tennessee, the Williams films in post-war America. Also with Bray, he edited Modern American Drama on Screen and its companion volume, Modern British Drama on Screen, both by Cambridge University Press. He is the editor of the Tennessee Williams Annual Review and the South Atlantic Review, as well as the book series editor for 6 academic presses. His most recent book is The Other Hollywood Renaissance, forthcoming by Edinburgh University Press. So at this point, it's my pleasure to turn the Zoom lens over to Tiffany Gilbert. Tiffany, take it away.
Thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk about Anna Magnani and her relationship with Tennessee Williams, and just to have an opportunity to talk about the sort of love that I have for these two artists, and just to talk about the love of what brings us, or what brought me to, this particular world. So let me just give you a bit of a backstory. So my introduction to Tennessee Williams, I think came through my father when I was back in like 7th grade or so. And I think the first film that he ever introduced me to was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And so, so that immediately sort of just caught my attention. Elizabeth Taylor and Paul Newman, I mean, could they be any more gorgeous? I don't think they were ever more gorgeous than in that particular film. And so that, of course, took me to, summer, Suddenly Last Summer, and then of course, most of Elizabeth Taylor films, and a lot of films by, with actors and actresses of that particular period, the sort of classic Hollywood period of the 50s in particular. So, I was really a fan of Technicolor, like Susan Hayward's Backstreet and all those good things, Imitation of Life, like Robert said. And so as I thought about what I wanted to do as a PhD student, I had this attraction with divas, number one, from Elizabeth Taylor all the way through Joan Collins on Dynasty, and then of course through Kiri te Kanawa and opera. And so thought about doing my dissertation and my research on 19th century British literature because of the sort of romantic attachments and obviously the attachments with Verdi and stuff like that in the opera world. I get to my PhD and realize, oh my God, I cannot do 19th century. It was fine. I did all my tests, I did everything. But when it came to the dissertation, I thought about, I need to go back to what my first love was. So I did film. So fast forward to when I get my tenure track position here. And when I was thinking about teaching a class, one particular semester, I said, well, let me go back to Tennessee Williams. I always loved his film adaptations, or the adaptations of his films rather. And that would get me, thinking a lot about his plays in particular, which I had, read a good number of, but I hadn't read all of them. And it was, we covered the classics, Suddenly Last Summer, and we covered Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and we covered Streetcar. And my students were they had never seen these films. A lot of them had never seen Marlon Brando on film. So I was like, oh my God, if I do anything right, I've introduced you to Marlon Brando and his performance in Streetcar. But I think I had seen Anna Magnani in The Rose Tattoo, but I forgot about it. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I realized, here she was in The Rose Tattoo, but it was The Fugitive Kind that really just opened my eyes. I know that performance or that film was critically, panned in some regards. But I found her just completely, absolutely riveting. I thought, for me, it was just a studied performance and just skill and mood. And I think the film captures that with its lighting and its music and the shadows and the play. And so I became much more fascinated with Anna Magnani as a result. And as I've been thinking about Anna Magnani over these past 7, 8 years or so, of course, her relationship with Tennessee Williams has come into play. And so he adored her, as we all know. And he just, of course, we know he wanted to get her to perform in The Rose Tattoo. And she was like, no, dude, my English is not that great. Maybe the film version, same thing with Orpheus Descending. She was like, nope, can't do that Broadway, but I'll do the film. And of course, the film became The Fugitive Kind. But he adored her. And I mean, there's so much about their relationship that I think it's very kinetic. I think they very much worked off one another. I think she understood him in ways and understood that he was, very obviously transgressive for his time. He totally respected that sensibility and that, sort of unconventionality in her. And so when I was invited to do this, I obviously knew I wanted to focus on those two. But I didn't want to find an image that had been seen before, and that I wanted to find one that had a little bit of movement and a little bit of quirkiness. So in this one, it shows Anna Magnani and Tennessee Williams, and I think this is about 1958. And they're on the Via Veneto, which is, of course, like the Tony hotspot where all, people who, go to see and be seen. And what I like about it is that they're leaving this discotheque with a dog. So I don't know whose idea that was, obviously Magnani's, but it was like, okay, let's go dance and take the dog. And I love Tennessee Williams' expression on his face, because it either suggests that either something went down and he's just like, whoa, whatever just happened in the disco, or he's, sort of just thinking of or looking at her like, oh my gosh, she's like the most amazing person on the planet. Like, how much more badass can Magnani be? And then, of course, you got the third guy who, given Magnani's sort of predilections for younger men, he could either be with her or he could be with Tennessee Williams. We don't know, but I wonder if he knows just how like fortunate he is to be like, these are two of the most iconic people. They're just completely just off, just out of this world in terms of what was expected of them, what people thought of them, what they thought about the rules that sort of kind of wanted to sort of hold them in, and how they were just like, you know what, we're not even going to play by that. We'll write our own scripts, so to speak. And so I just love this image, because either Magnani is cussing someone out. I imagine she's like maybe looking at someone, either, or she's just sort of like, this is where we're going to go next. Like she's taking charge of the moment. And the dog is just priceless, I think. But there's so many other images with the two of them where you see them obviously in sort of a loving sort of relationship. They're always in close proximity. They're always either embracing one another, they're looking at one another. Some of them are posed, or some of them staged, but then some of them I think are just, spontaneous, and they just truly have this remarkable attachment for one another. And so when I got to the class and we got to The Fugitive Kind, what was interesting was that my students too could kind of see that sort of, deference to Magnani. Like he just sort of laid it all out for her. I know a lot of people talk about Brando and his character and just like how he's playing like this blues sort of figure or some sort of quasi white Negro type of figure. But I think he just gives it all up to her. And there's so many different ways, and especially at the end where she's just practically shimmering with the tinsel and everything, if you've seen the film. But the two of them together, to me, are just so much more fascinating, even with the other sort of collaborations that he had with other actresses. I mean, those two, they were just, I mean, I love them. I can only imagine drinking with them. I think that would have been a hoot. And I think it would have just been a delight. Now, I don't know if I would have been left standing, but I think I would have enjoyed it immensely. And I think that's about my time.
Tiffany, that was perfect. And I have to say, when Tiffany sent me this image, the first thing I wanted to do was actually revise the session and say, everybody go find Tennessee Williams with a dog. There are these great images out there where he's holding a pug, and it's all just very adorable, but it was too late to redo the session on Tennessee Williams and dogs. So that'll be next year's, Robert. Let's make a note. And now I will turn over the floor to Bess Rowen.
Thanks, Margaret. Hey, everyone. Hi there. So I am here to talk to you about a very different kind of image. I'm sorry there's not a dog. I will do better next time to follow the prompt. But what I'm talking to you about today is this 2019 production still from a production of Night of the Iguana that was done at the Provincetown Tennessee Williams Festival by a company from South Africa called Abrahamsey and Meyer. And what I love about this image is that for me, as a theater person, and I am a scholar, but I'm a theater nerd at heart. And what I love about theater is watching all of these different elements combine to enrich each other. So what I'm going to tell you about today for this image are the three threads of theater history that I see kind of coming together here to produce, like, when you think of Night of the Iguana, you don't directly think of Noh usually. So what happens when you put those things together? Well, the first thread, obviously, that I'll pull from is Noh theater itself. For those of you who don't know, I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot of Noh jokes. It's just going to be how it is. It is part of the intangible cultural history heritage of Japan. So it was founded in the 14th century. And of course, people study this tradition for their entire lives. And as you can tell from this production still, this is not a full Noh production. How do we know that? Well, they're not wearing masks. There are no musicians on stage, and there's a woman on stage. All of these are pretty good indications we're not dealing with a traditional Noh production. And yet, there are two aspects of Noh theater that this company borrowed. The first was design, and the second was theme. So the design, in a traditional Noh production, you have an all wooden stage with a little wooden area that people walk down called the Hashigakari, and then a square wooden platform that has 4 pillars and a roof. So it's a little dark, but you can see in this image, you can see the place where people would process. You can also see that there is, it doesn't have exactly 4 pillars, but there is a square wooden part of this that does, again, it's reminiscent of a Noh stage. It doesn't have a pine tree on the back. It's missing some things, but the elements are there. You can also see costume-wise, and I'll get to the figure in the kimono in a second, but not the kimono, but the traditional kind of costume with the robe, with the sleeves. I'll get there in a second, but that is also, again, not a Western style of dress, but not 100% what you would see in a full Noh production. But the other thing that I find interesting is Noh theater, there are 5 kinds of plays, and they all have interesting themes that actually have nothing to do with plot. Nothing really happens in Noh plays, and yet relationships happen. So specifically, what I think is interesting is there are 2 figures that are really important in a Noh play. The first is called the Shite, which is the leading character. He is usually an old holy man, a deity, a demon, a spirit, or just a living person. And the second is the Waki. And the Waki is the listener. And they're usually a wandering priest, someone who's passing through and sort of witnesses the story of the main character. And that's where I think this gets really interesting, because if you know the play, Shannon isn't exactly a wandering priest, but he is an ex-minister. So we do have a wandering holy man. He is also, as far as we can tell, a living man. So, he could be both Shite and Waki. And Hannah can also be both Shite and Waki. She is a living person, but she also witnesses Shannon's story. And that's where I think things start to get interesting. We see that it's not a perfect matchup between these styles, and yet what falls out is this really interesting resonance on pieces of the play we might not otherwise think about. So the second thread here is that this idea of Noh being an influence for Williams didn't just come out of nowhere. Actually, we know that Williams went to visit Japan in the late 50s. He was friends, of course, with Yukio Mishima, and Mishima took him to a bunch of Noh and Kabuki performances at the time he was writing Night of the Iguana and Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore. So the influence is a lot more obvious in Milk Train, where we have those stage assistants, but it does make sense that this play, Night of the Iguana, would also have sort of elements from that, something that would have been very fresh for Williams at the time. And then the third thing that I want to bring into here is the fact that the figure standing on stage in front of us here is Everett Quinton. So maybe some of you recognized him. He is downtown avant-garde theater royalty and queer royalty. So he, of course, is probably best known for working with the Ridiculous Theatrical Company with Charles Ludlam. He was a longtime member and also the artistic director of it for a while. So he also brings this thread of another influence we know Williams had. We know that he went to the Ridiculous Theatrical Company a lot. We know that he saw these downtown avant-garde performances. And that's in all of this work too. And yet I want to point out too that not necessarily the Ridiculous Theatrical Company, but the Performing Garage, the Performance Group, the Worcester Group, the Living Theater, those kinds of companies have a kind of rough history with cultural appropriation of techniques and aesthetics taken liberally from theatrical and performance traditions from India, China, Japan, among others. And I want to point out that that is very, very different from what this production did. The way that the avant-garde theaters tended to treat those was like, oh, it's pretty and we can borrow like a kimono or something like that and just put it on stage without really contextualizing it. Meanwhile, Abraham and Mayer really take these elements the way, as close an approximation as they would have been used in a Noh play, but in a play where there are still characters in some Western dress. And so that it's a very different kind of handling of this material. And why does all of this matter? Well, here's why I think it does. I'm not someone who always thinks, oh yeah, let's pick a random theater style and just see how that works for a play. And yet when that does happen, and as I said, this is not a totally random style. When it does happen, I think we both gain and we lose. We gain some very interesting resonance that you might not have thought about before, and we lose some of the sort of more realistic slice of life aspects of it that we might see in a more traditional kind of realistic production. But for Williams, who is so often put incorrectly, I think we can say, in the realism box, I love that this production wouldn't let us do that with Iguana. It picked a style that we could not pretend was only about kitchen sink realism. And in doing so, it forced us to look at some of the stylistic things that Williams is doing that are really, really interesting. And again, I never would have thought of Iguana as the play where two people witness each other's stories. I do think it is that play, but it's also a lot of other things too. So what do we gain by thinking about it like that? I would argue we gain something interesting. And then I'll conclude by saying that, you know, this panel is called The World Lit by Lightning. You can see that the world is lit by a lantern in this particular image, a lantern, which again is Japanese style, but in a Noh play, the lantern would be played by a fan. And a fan, in fact, played the role of the iguana in this production. So I will leave you with this to say that, you know, the world is lit by lightning. That's very true, but lightning can be done a whole bunch of different ways on stage. And it doesn't always have to approximate real lightning in order for it to light us up in new and cool ways. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bess. And I absolutely love this. There's some additional pictures of this in the issue of the review in which Bess has her review of the production. And just to clarify, in case anyone wondered, the role of the iguana and a light being played by a fan, that is an actual physical fan and not a fan from the audience or
Sorry,
a fan
yeah.
from something like that.
Thank you for clarifying
Which is
that,
like-
Margaret. Yes.
I had that. Although I'd actually love to see a production like that where they invite someone from the audience to come up and be the iguana. You know, you just
I
sort of
volunteer.
slide under the porch there. And you make some noise when we have to make some noise.
I volunteer. I will do that.
Excellent. We'll put that down. We'll have iguanas. We'll have fans as iguanas and dogs next year. Thank you so much, Bess. And Naghmeh.
Hello. Thanks for being here. Time is the longest distance between 2 points. Most of us are familiar with this line by Tennessee Williams from Tom Wingfield's final monologue in The Glass Menagerie. This line resonated well with my feeling when I was standing in front of the house, the award party house in New Orleans in November 2018. I was attending a conference in New Orleans and I had a chance of taking a walk to St. Peter's Street to visit the house number 632.5 in that street, in which Tennessee Williams lived in 1946 and 1947, where he created A Streetcar Named Desire. I couldn't enter the house and visit inside, but I spent about an hour around it and just thinking about the long distance journey the play created in that house had taken through time, about 7 years in between, and also beyond the borders of culture, languages, and also the geographical borders in order to leave an impact on my life. And also I thought about the border crossing journey I had taken in my personal life in order to reach that very moment and location in order to visit that building. So that was an intimate moment of border crossing encounter between me and my understanding of Tennessee Williams. Actually, I had started working on Tennessee Williams plays back in Iran in 2011 and 12 when I was a graduate student of English literature at University of Tehran. I signed up for a seminar presentation for a dramatic literature course on Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. And as a reader and a fan of his plays, who was also an ardent audience of many cinematic adaptations, I decided to work on the adaptation, Elia Kazan's work as well. And that was the beginning of my becoming interested in working on Tennessee Williams' plastic theater and the cinematic potentials of his plastic theater and how they unfold into the cinematic adaptations and whether those potentials have been realized and used in cinematic adaptations or not. That developed into my master's thesis on Tennessee Williams adaptations. I remember when I sent an email to Barton Palmer in that time to introduce my work and seek some advice about it. He was really surprised to learn that an Iranian student was working on Tennessee Williams adaptations, probably because of Tennessee Williams' reputation as an American author whose family drama is more readable or relatable to the culture, the American culture and the Southern United States culture. However, that didn't sound really strange to me being an Iranian, as Tennessee Williams had always been a well-cherished playwright among many Iranian readers, and also parallel with the time that I was working on his adaptation, a cinematic adaptation, an Iranian adaptation based on The Glass Menagerie had been released in Iranian cinema. Sergio, would you please switch to the next image? Thank you. So Here Without Me, directed by Bahram Tawakkoli in 2011, is a cross-cultural adaptation based on The Glass Menagerie. This is a considerable adaptation based on that play for both knowing and unknowing audiences, the audiences who are familiar with Tennessee Williams' work and also the two American adaptations, and also the ones who are not. So in this case study, I had a chance of offering a new case study and a study of one Tennessee Williams adaptation that was not an American one and put it in conversation with Hollywood's Tennessee, which is a precious edition and one of the best resources of my work, written by, edited by Robert Bray and Barton Palmer. So in this adaptation, we can see how beautifully the memory play of Tennessee Williams unfolds into a cinematic adaptation made for Iranian audiences, but not only for Iranian audiences, and how the family drama of 20th century of an American culture is readapted relocalized and also reculturalized for a family drama of 21st century in Iran, and how the characters are readapted in that sociocultural setting. So just I point to one example, the character of mother, Amanda, adapted for an Iranian working class mother who is working in a factory and is actively fighting for her family's economic survival, and is also supporting her children, but at the same time is carrying those dreams in her heart for a better future for her children. So this adaptation actually breaks the stereotyped cliche of Amanda as a Southern belle, and also breaks the stereotyped cliche of the Middle Eastern woman's profile in the view of global audiences. So this adaptation had some global success as well. And if you are interested in watching it, I just recommend it. It's available with English subtitles online. And also, so we don't have much time to go through details of that, but if you are interested in reading more about it, also you can read about it in the annual review. But I want to reconnect that adaptation and the study of that adaptation with that reflective moment when I was standing in front of that building. So Sergio, would you please switch to the last image? Thank you. So in that visit in New Orleans, and the building in which Tennessee Williams had created this this play, A Streetcar Named Desire, that was the very first play of Williams I worked on, and I definitely included other adaptations in my research as well. I could see the variable of time omitted for a second. I don't want to sound exaggerating to say that Tennessee Williams changed my life, but I can comfortably claim that Tennessee Williams left an irreversible impact on my life, and my interest in working on Tennessee Williams adaptations redirected the course of my future and also my academic career, as I ended up coming to the US and continuing working on adaptations and cross-cultural adaptations, which is still an obsession for my academic career. So I would like to draw on this personal story to go beyond it, to rethink the concept of the influential author, Tennessee Williams being definitely one of them. We never have access to the hidden corners of influence left by influential authors beyond time, location, and through generations. Today is Tennessee Williams' birthday. Good time to take one step back and one step away from the theory of the death of the author, not only to celebrate the birth of the author, but also to celebrate the eternal sunshine of the consciousness and the presence of the author throughout his authorship and his works. If we could omit the variable of time from this experience, just hypothetically, Tennessee Williams writing his play inside that building and me standing outside the building thinking about that play coexist. In other words, the artistic creation embodies the potentials and the spectrum of his border-crossing influence. It's only a matter of time for such potential to be released, revealed, and sparkling in adaptations, readership, audiences, and through performances. I would like to end this talk with 2 lines of a Tennessee Williams poem. Actually, these are the 2 lines I had written in the very first page of my master's thesis, and I returned to it just during last week for this presentation. I didn't remember the poetry, and I was really surprised to see how closely they spoke of today's panel's title. So these 2 lines are from his poetry, his poem, Part of a Hero. I don't suppose that he will be able to build these fires much longer, as part of himself must burn like a match struck to light them. And I believe that the fire Tennessee Williams lit up in that building is still burning until today, and we are all gathering around the warmth and the light of it. Thank you.
Naghmeh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. That was exactly, I love all of the personal reflections that are coming into the pieces that everyone is talking about today. It's very, very much what we were hoping this session would do. I think we all need a little love and a little joy after what the world has been through. And I'm going to say too, Naghmeh finished with that beautiful line of poetry, and I'll just take a moment to say that the upcoming issue of the review has in it a previously unpublished poem by Tennessee Williams. I think we have in our audience Barbara Neri, who uncovered it in the holdings at the Williams Research Center, and John Bach contributed some biographical information too. And in that poem, Tennessee Williams in the 70s actually brings Blanche and Stanley to the courtroom and puts Blanche on the stand. And it's sort of, there's an alternation. Is she the plaintiff or is she the defendant? So we invite all of you to look at that. And I invite you also to please come and look at Naghmeh's essay, which has other stills from that film and just gorgeous details, like the dress in Glass Menagerie that is bought for Laura in this movie it becomes a sofa. It's furniture. What happens when the clothing, what place the clothing holds for the U.S. audience, the furniture holds for the Iranian audience, and it's fascinating. Thank you so much, Naghmeh. And batting cleanup for us today is the Review's current editor-in-chief, the esteemed Barton Palmer.
Hi, thank you so much, Margaret, and thanks to Robert and everyone at THNOC who's made this possible. And I'm very glad to be able to join everybody today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the image that you now see on the screen, which is a frame from the 1951 film version of A Streetcar Named Desire, directed by Elia Kazan. It is a striking tableau that was undoubtedly adapted from Kazan's stage version of the play. And it's like most tableaus and like images in general in film, it has to be appreciated on two different levels. One is in terms of what sorts of pleasure that we might get from it. That is to view it aesthetically. But the other way in which it has to be appreciated is in terms of what kind of meanings it contains. And I'd like to spend a little bit more time talking about that. Beyond saying that the tableau itself reminds me, at least the position of Stella, very much of the way that the Virgin Mary is depicted very often in statuary. And to see Stanley as a kind of supplicant looking for forgiveness and mercy, which of course is what the scene is all about. This is a makeup scene where the errant male, having indulged in violence against the woman he loves, seeks forgiveness from her, and on his knees receives her acceptance of him. This particular way of representing the relationship between Stella and Stanley has a kind of interesting role, or played a kind of interesting role in the way that the film itself was understood during the later stages of its production. And I'm going to refer to that particular moment in a minute or so. What I'm going to call attention to is what the censors at the Production Code Administration had to say about the final version of the film. One of the comments that they, observation on the part of people who had lived more or less with Streetcar for some time, as they sought to make it acceptable in terms of the production code for American audiences. But before I do that, I'd like to say something about Tennessee Williams that's more in the way of a personal comment. And that is that this image belongs very much, in my mind, to the way in which Williams functioned within the 50s and early 60s in regard to American culture more generally, and in particular in the way that American culture was at that time struggling to understand the meaning of sexuality and gender relations, the way that women and men together, and the violence that they do to one another and the love they feel for one another was being understood. This feeling, we call, perhaps following Raymond Williams, the sociologist, the structure of feelings has a lot to do with the way that Williams himself functioned in the culture. That is, as I remember it growing up as an adolescent with Williams, being in that cultural moment, being part of that structure of feeling, that there were secrets to sex. Sex was not something that was talked about except in metaphor and with a lack of detail. And that having an understanding of sexuality and of romantic love involved finding out what the truth was. Somehow Williams seemed to have more knowledge about this than others. He was connected to a vein in human experience that, for whatever series of reasons, personal and artistic, allowed him to communicate to this at a particularly important moment in American culture, when Americans themselves were concerned with discovering what sex is all about. And of course, I'm talking about the two Kinsey books, the Kinsey Report on Men, 1948, and the Kinsey Report on Women, 1953, both of which, whatever you think of them as scientific examinations of sexual practice, were part of a cause célèbre regarding sexuality and of the way in which men and women relate to one another. And what I would like to do is suggest that this image is related to a secret. And it's a secret that was discovered by the Production Code Administration head censor in Hollywood, Joseph Breen, and his very intelligent assistant, a man named Jack Vizard, who was at one time a candidate for the priesthood, and was the most intellectual of people working within the Production Code Administration. And after months and months of struggling over the film, and first the script, then the film, trying to modulate the ways in which the Williams property represented and alluded to sexual matters, finally getting to the point where the film itself was done, edited in part secretly, so that Kazan didn't know. There were last minute changes. There's a whole kind of a thriller suspense aspect to this part of what was the film's production history. And you can read about it in the book that Robert and I wrote about it. Really, it was a fascinating story for us to research and to retell in the book. Jack Vizard turns to Joseph Breen and he says to Joe, Joe, we missed what was going on in this film. We were concerned about Blanche and the rape scene and the allusions to Alan Gray and the sense in which Blanche is presented as a loose woman, a promiscuous woman, maybe with interest in men too young for her to legitimately be interested in. All those things we were concerned about. And while we were so concerned with all about them, with them, we missed what the story and subsequently the film was all about. And Jack Vizard said, the film is about desire. It's about the word in the title. It's about not only thinking about desirable objects and practices and acts, but about understanding the force of it itself, the force of desire. And one of the things about this particular image is that it is an image of desire. It is an image of desire on the part of Stanley and the part of Stella. There are few images in any Hollywood film of the period, and even now, that are more evocative of the raw elemental connection between two people, both emotional and physical, both sexual and in terms of mutual caring and admiration, of need and desire. This is a tableau that suggests that. And one of the things that I think that we really learned from Williams in this film, and also in The Rose Tattoo, which is another place where we have desire enacted and dramatized is that to some extent, the way in which we in the Academy have been analyzing sexuality in the movies has been only partially accurate. We've been concerned for the last 40 years with understanding how images can be pleasurable and they can be a source of attraction for the viewer, and the fact that the images themselves can be politically fraught with danger. That is, in particular in Hollywood films, the way in which the female body is objectified and produced as an object of desire for the presumably male viewer. What I think Williams suggests in this film, and also in The Rose Tattoo and elsewhere in his canon, is the way in which desire is not just a feature of an erotic longing of men for objectified female body, but something that women feel as well. And what I see in this image is a female desire that is so traditional. In fact, it'd be very easy to use this kind of image as a way of understanding what romance has been since 12th century France discovered it. That is that what matters most is the notion of consent to desire, consent to love, and to be loved.
Barton, that was wonderful. Now we've gotten to 12th century France. We've been to Italy. We've been to Iran. We've been to Japan. I'm really glad that Robert is the one who's going to be making the first remarks, because this is going in so many different directions. I don't know what I would do to tie anything together. I'll give Robert a few minutes to think about it and just once again put in another plug. This time, the Historic New Orleans collection is going to be having an exhibition in 2022. About a year from now, it'll be the 75th anniversary of Streetcar Named Desire, the staging of it. And so there are going to be lots of fantastic things in there. I think Blanche's dress, I think Vivian Lee's Oscar, as well as a lot of literary artifacts. And the Tennessee Williams Annual Review will have a special feature devoted to that. So come when we're all in person next year, and I believe that we will be, make sure that you come see the exhibition, which will open just in time for the festival. And Robert, I will let you take us in some direction. There are so many that you could go in.
Well, the image that Barton chose reminds me of what a treasure trove of materials that the Historic New Orleans collection has in the Williams Research Center. It's just been fascinating going through these materials, such as Vivian Lee's notebook and all of the manuscripts and typescripts that are housed there. So by all means, if you are in New Orleans and have some time to spend, go to the Williams Research Center and take a look at the holdings there. Thank you all for your cogent, illuminating, and yes, entertaining presentations. We learned a lot from these. Williams said, I have a poet's weakness for symbols. We might argue with that. We might say that it was a strength. And the ways in which Williams imbues his work with images and symbols provides a very rich vein to be mined by literary scholars, but also actors, directors, and stage production people in both plays and films. Some of the symbolic images that come to mind are Laura's figurines from the Glass Menagerie, Brick and Maggie's bedroom, which the bed becomes the locus of sexual politics in that play, and in the film as well. And Shannon's hammock and the Night of the Iguana, traditionally a symbol of leisure, but this becomes his site of anxiety and torment. There are dozens more. The snakeskin jacket. There's so many more images and symbols, but I think that you've all chosen some good ones. And I've worked with all of you in the past, and it's a pleasure to see that you're still doing great work. So I'm going to turn it back over to Margaret, who will, I think, start leading a question and answer session.
Yep. And I think, Sergio, can we get a gallery view maybe so we can all see each other and pretend we're sort of in the same place? I have been to a lot of online conferences myself this year, and I think it's really nice for the audience to be able to see each other, and we can all just sort of wave. And even if we don't know each other, we wave at you too. I'm going to change my speaker to a gallery view. Oh, look, so many people that I know. Hi, John. Yeah, thank all of you so much for coming. It's really makes it a very special and very personal session. So if people have questions, you're welcome to go ahead and put them in chat. I can try to do the Zoom thing where we raise our hands. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see everybody, but I will scroll through and see if there are any up there as well. I thought personally, I was just amazed at how many things come up for such an, as Naghmeh said, such a supposedly quintessentially American author to then just have so much interest. That's been one of the things that's been amazing, and will come up in the streetcar exhibition too, is France, Jean Cocteau. Dirk Gint has an article about Cat on a Hot Tin Roof in Sweden, a Bergman production of that, which is fascinating. I feel like I heard a beep, like somebody is raising a hand and I'm not seeing it. Is that right? Is there one up?
It's Dolores.
Dolores. Okay, Dolores.
Hi there. Sorry about that. That actually wasn't me trying to raise my hand. So there might be someone else still out there with a question, but I was furiously typing this in. My question is for the scholars working with the film adaptations. I was wondering if you thought we could consider the golden age of the Tennessee Williams adaptation, roughly, I don't know, 1950 to 1970. Do you think he is, in a way, a kind of auteur of these films? Do you think that there's a sense, kind of like a poetic sensibility or something about his work in particular that survives adaptation from Kazan to Richard Brooks to Sidney Lumet, something that you can say is consistent in those very different adaptations?
Barton, you want to take that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's an excellent question. We actually consider that issue in the first chapter of our book, and suggest that the Williams films deserve to be treated as a body of work, even though creatively speaking, he's not the auteur responsible for what goes on the screen. And actually, if we suggested that he was responsible in some large part for it, he'd probably be scandalized, because there are a number of films he didn't particularly like, though we may have different opinions about their value these days. But certainly the Williams films constitute a group that is very interesting culturally and artistically. They fit into that first 15 years or so, or 20 years or so of the post-war period. And at that point, things change in America, and he's no longer at the center of things the way he was. But for the period, I would say, from Glass Menagerie to Night of the Iguana, that's 50 to 65, he is the principal American author adapted for the screen. And he is known all over the world as a result of the film adaptations.
We've got a question here for Naghmeh. Where could one see the adaptation of Glass Menagerie that you mentioned?
Yes, I was about typing the answer. Actually, I am going to put it in the chat. IMV Box is a website that has a very good and large archive of Iranian films with English subtitles, but you should sign up in order to see the subtitles. So I'm going to put the link in here.
That'd be great.
Okay, yeah, well, that and I think we can probably leave the chat up for a little bit afterwards to make sure people have time to scroll back and grab that link. And oh, actually, could you tell the audience the director did another adaptation of a Williams play. I not remember.
Yeah, he made an adaptation in 2014, The Stranger, based on A Streetcar Named Desire, but it wasn't as successful as the first one. But for either the knowing and unknowing audiences, so it was a kind of failure. Although he has become, he was a very young director, and he has become an auteur director of Iranian cinema, Bahram Tabakkoli, but Here Without Me is exceptionally the best adaptation he's ever made. So I prefer to put this adaptation in the list of Iranian cross-cultural adaptations, because Iran has had good cross-cultural adaptations based on Western literature and American literature before. So it might be an exceptional case in Tabakkoli's filmography, but not an exceptional case in the history of Iranian cinema's adaptation production.
There's a question here about production and production challenges. Are producers still experiencing challenges from the estate? I know the estate has always, and the way that rights are sort of divided up between who has publication rights and who has production rights. I don't know that much about productions myself. Bess, you are probably might be the one to speak to this.
I will jump in. Well, I will say first of all that I think we have this idea that the Williams estate is really difficult to work with on this. They aren't. The ones who are difficult to work with are Beckett and O'Neill and folks like that. Actually, as long as you're doing the words, the spoken words, the estate's pretty okay with things. I think a lot about this because copyright and all of this kind of gets into the area of stage directions a lot. And I'm always the person saying, like, the stage directions are part of the play. So if you're Sam Gold and you want to do the Glass Menagerie, but you don't want to do any of the stage directions, you're not really doing the Glass Menagerie. And yet they didn't have a problem with that production at all in terms of the estate. Critically, yes. But I think that there was no problem with doing a no-inflected Night of the Iguana because they did all of the lines. And in fact, they didn't cut it in any significant way that was not okay. So that's allowed. And it's actually one of the things that's really cool about the Williams estate. The place people get into trouble is some of the German productions really wanted to slice and chop and reorganize things. And that's when the estate's like, okay, hold up. You can't call it the play if you're doing that, which I think is more than fair, honestly. So I think that the Williams estate is actually really easy to work with and considerably easier than a lot of the playwrights who are known as nightmares if you are trying to do anything remotely different. And again, that's really Beckett. Beckett's estate will shut you down. But Williams's estate, they were fine. They didn't have a problem.
Oh, that's actually one advantage that I learned about. Been talking with Barton is in touch with a scholar at St. Petersburg University who's been writing about the first Soviet production of Streetcar Named Desire. And since copyright was not recognized, or the translation rights, they did whatever they wanted to do. And I believe the first production of Streetcar actually gave it a happy ending. The translator wrote into it, Mitch comes in and saves Blanche and everything is fine, which I suppose has its own advantages for the director if you can do whatever you like. Of course, if you've got Soviet censorship to worry about, on the other hand, that's you can decide how much of a trade-off that is. Let's see. Oh, we've got another question here for
question about opera.
Terry Gilbert and Bess Rowen, both of your presentations had operatic resonances. Yes. Did you find any evidence of the influence of opera on Tennessee Williams' work in your research? I'm aware of his screenwriting for Visconti's Senso, and his work seems operatic in general, but I was wondering if you knew which operas or performers may have influenced him specifically. I think I heard Kiri Te Kanawa, I think maybe came up in the conversation, or either of you, but maybe
Tiffany.
Tiffany, I'll give you a chance.
Oh, sure. Well, it's interesting. I might actually go find out. haven't seen anything other than with that Senso and the Visconti production, but in terms of his actual sort of influence, direct influence from some sort of opera singer or figure of the time, I have not come across that. But what was interesting when I was writing about Anna Magnani and The Fugitive Kind for the Tennessee Williams Review, I started to look at her as the centerpiece of that film, not Marlon Brando's character, not Val, although a lot of people have written about that and how he's like this blues figure. But I looked at it as sort of Magnani became the source, or became the figure with whom we could associate sort of this blues disposition or this blues impulse a la Ralph Ellison. And what was interesting to me is how the way her speeches are characterized almost as like these sort of, I didn't necessarily call them like these, I kind of probably switched idioms at that point, but they became like these little mini arias at this point. When she's doing the speech with the fig tree at the end, and the way Magnani's voice, I mean, to me, that was another thing that fascinated me with Magnani. It was just the way she could talk, right? And the way she would just spool out a line of language or of script. And so when she was talking about, everything, when she said like the glass bells, the tinsel and everything, and the way she just almost performs, and I'm not a musician, but maybe in my dreams, like she almost approximates like the sort of legato line, like an opera singer would, the way she actually speaks the part, right? And so I always felt that in those particular moments, he gives her, or maybe Lumet or the lighting and the whole apparatus gives Anna Magnani this sort of diva moment, right, within the film. And so, yeah, this whole idea that Marlon Brando, I know people are going to hate on it, but like, he's like he's like the blues guy. I'm like, the dude sings like 5 seconds. He's like walking around with his guitar. I don't understand like why they did that, but they did. But in any event, that particular sensibility, I feel like they just give it to Magnani because of who she is. It's like, you just take it and you do that fig tree speech and you just invest all the Magnani and just let your voice just sort of take over it. And even when she comes down the steps, when she's the ex-boyfriend, I can't even think of his name, the ex-boyfriend, the way she comes down the steps, the staircase, and how every word is almost, it's like a particular kind of cadence. Yeah, David Couture, this particular cadence with which she speaks. And then as she walks a little faster, and then it to me is just so marvelous. So I would say, I don't know if there's a direct operatic element, influence to it, but I feel that there's some other sensibility, maybe apart from jazz or apart from theater, or maybe it's just sort of intuitive on Magnani's part. I don't know, but I just found it so fascinating, and it's so different in the way, like, I mean, I love the rose tattoo, and I'm writing on that as well with Magnani. But like I said, when I saw The Fugitive Kind, I was like, this is my jam. I'm like, this is this is like the best thing I ever saw. And my whole class was like, oh my God. And we still loved Elizabeth Taylor, but we're like, the sleeper hit of the semester is The Fugitive Kind.
That's super interesting. I want to add to that a little bit. And I would push back on the idea that opera is separate from theater. It is, but it's also like, I really always want to hit back on the fact that like performance and studying performance is a part of all of this. And I think that like the lived embodied performance of what you're describing, I can't name specific opera people who might have influenced Williams, but what I get from that interest, and even what Tiffany just said, is this idea that the scale of what these characters are dealing with is somehow bigger than the theater. But I don't actually think that it is. I think it's part of the theater scale, but it is a scale that we often see in opera. The scale of feelings, the scale of relationships, the scale of resonance seems operatic to us because it is big. It's bigger than life. It's these people's entire lives in this, 2-hour, 3-hour play. But I also want to point out that there is we can't forget that like Williams is a queer man who, I think of the Wayne Kestenbaum book, The Queen's Throat. You know, this idea, this connection that like gay men specifically, but also like queer people, this identification with the opera diva is like it's a thing that is a thread that I think we can easily forget. But I think that that's also what I'm seeing here is like Williams's divas are like opera divas in scale and in resonance. And so even if they're not singing, you know, we can imagine the Blanche opera, you know, and we can easily kind of go there. So, and again, exactly what you're saying, Tiffany, like you know, it's an opera in aesthetic sort of, even though there's not a lot of singing,
Right.
you know, in The Fugitive Kind or in The Rose Tattoo, because of who the diva is.
Right.
And that is so important. And again, like tracks us back to not just opera, but like opera to queer culture, to Williams. It always triangulates in these cool ways.
Well, yeah, and this is my last bit on it. Like even with The Rose Tattoo, I mean, again, you have Magnani. And so again, like, can anyone imagine any of the other sort of actresses in his sort of universe to play this woman who's like so obsessed with her husband's body? I mean, really, that she's like, I just need to burn it and have it in his urn so I can have it, right? And then when, you know, to find out that I mean, no other person could use silence the way Magnani used silence. Why don't you just get dressed, lady? She's like, no. So even the way she mourns becomes so much more of a thing, like you're saying. It takes on that operatic scale that I don't know we could see other like American authors. I mean, maybe, and I'll say this, and I'll leave it at that. I mean, I guess I wasn't there. Maureen Stapleton was good, I guess. But there's no way my mind can wrap itself around her as Lady Torrance or as Serafina. I mean, I'm sure she was great, and if anyone's related, but I just don't see, I can't say it in terms of like the sort of magnitude of that performance.
Well, we also might mention that Magnani won the Academy Award for her performance in The Rose Tattoo for Best Actress.
True, and she had to she had to beat Susan Hayward for that over, I believe it was the, not I Want to Live, but the other one, where she plays the drunken woman, I believe. I can't think of the character, but yeah, so it's amazing that she was able to do that. They picked the right one.
That was a great question. Somebody write an essay for us. Submit it. Some images. I think that was a great question. I think we have time for one more before the session wraps up. If anybody's got one hiding in there. It's easier for me to see it if you put it in the chat. I will scroll through. Anybody? Or perhaps we've covered all the ground.
Solved everything. That's great.
Yep, we've solved all the problems. It's all answered. It's all done. As a colleague I had back when I was 35 said to me once, and she was complaining about feeling old at turning 30. I said, hey, watch who you say that to. And she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, well, but it's okay. Everything worked out for you. You're done. Fine.
Well.
It's everything's worked out for us. We figured everything out about Tennessee Williams. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. This was really great. I hope all of you enjoyed it as much as I did. And there will be a recording of this that the festival will put on its YouTube channel tomorrow. If there's any notes you want to take, things you want to miss, don't forget to go scroll back through the chat and get the link that Naghmeh put up so that you can see those Iranian adaptations. And I think we'll call it a wrap. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Margit.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Yes.